Hello and welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. My name is Chris Hume and I'm delighted that you are joining me today. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Mine Floor Covering, located right here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you need new floors, Nickel Mine Floor Covering is the way to go. You can go to nickelminefloorcovering.com or you can check out their showroom in Corryville, Pennsylvania. Well, today's episode is about Amos Miller, who has come to represent freedom, really, in many ways in Lancaster County and even across the nation. As you may have seen on Thursday last week, Amos Miller's farm was raided. State troopers, state employees entered his property, had a search warrant, raided his farm, took some of his products, and told him that he's not allowed to sell many items in here, milk, cheese, so forth, and everything in this cooler cannot be sold. So I'll read that in a moment here when we get to it. But I want to share several thoughts about Amos Miller and about this case, even in this brief podcast. First of all, I want to say that it was a privilege to be there and see this as it was happening. It was discouraging, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to have been there and share with you what was happening on Amos's property. This story is not over yet. There's much more to come. This is, as I understand right now, the order is still standing that Amos is not to sell those products. He's not to dispose of them. He's not to move them. And I'm gonna read the order. What it says here. It says, This is what's taped to Amos Miller's walk-in cooler door. Notice: food under detention. This food has been detained by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture pursuant to Section 5726A of the Food Safety Act. On and on. Notice is hereby given that 1, the food may be adulterated or misbranded and shall be detained. 2, it is unlawful to remove the food from the premises or to dispose of it without the approval of the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. Then it goes on, it says, identification of the products under detention. Raw milk, raw dairy products, cheeses, meats, including all food products being stored in this walk-in cooler number 1. And then it goes on and says, removal or disposal of a detained or embargoed food article is prohibited by Section 5723(6) of the Act and punishable by criminal penalties, civil penalties up to $10,000, or both under Section 5725 of the Act. This detention order is issued this 4th day of January, 2024, and then it has some initials there, NDM and NM. So this is what's happening, folks. This is what's going on here in Lancaster County. The state government has come in and told Amos Miller, not only is Amos Miller not allowed to sell these products, but you and I are not allowed to buy them. And I was just speaking with a friend of mine, and that's one of the things he pointed out. This is not simply about Amos Miller. This is not simply about whether or not Amos Miller is allowed to do business, which is an issue. That's enough right there for us to be concerned about this. But this is not only about Amos Miller. This is about the freedom that you and I have to buy food to feed ourselves and our families. The state wants nothing more than to be in control of every single food, outlet. They want to have a monopoly on this. They do not want you and I to have the freedom to say, you know what, I want to go to this person and buy food from them, even if that person does not follow the regulations of this. In fact, for many of us, because of that, actually, specifically because they do not follow the licensing and the regulations and all those requirements, we would rather buy from them. We don't trust the government. I mean, there are still many people out there, I guess, that have this undying faith and undying trust in the government, state government, federal government, whatever they say, it must be for our good. They're obviously looking out for our best interests. Meanwhile, they're butchering, murdering millions of babies, attempting to force us to get a vaccine. Oh yeah, but they definitely know what's best for us, and they certainly know what's healthy, right? Meanwhile, you have the huge food corporations with all their additives, all their chemicals, all their preservatives. They get the stamp of approval from the USDA or the PDA, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. But Amos Miller here and the small guy, the local guys, they're the problem. And again, people have told me, well, Amos Miller is, he's not a small farmer. This is a big operation. Well, compared to maybe, someone who has a half-acre garden, yeah, Amos Miller is a bigger farmer. But compared to the huge corporations, Amos Miller still is a small farmer. And really, to me, he represents kind of the biggest of the small farmers. And that's why I believe the state government in this case and the federal government in the past, and I'm sure they'd like to get involved again, are going after Amos because he represents someone who's big enough that it makes them look bad if they don't crack down on him. Here's a man who is practicing freedom, free under the law of God to serve his neighbor, and yet the state does not like this. The state hates the idea of freedom. The state hates the idea of you and I making our own choices. And sadly, many Americans want that. They want that comfort. It's a false comfort, but they love this idea that the state will make the decisions for them. The state will tell them what is safe to eat. So you can have the state sign off on, this chemical, laden, all these preservatives, all this, these additives in the food. The state says that's okay. But the state says Amos is milk, Amos is cheese. In this case, we got stickers on jars of beets and salsa that the state says, oh, you can't move this. So if the state says this isn't safe, then it must not be safe. That brings us, that's a huge part of this problem. This reveals this mentality that the state is our nanny, and many have embraced that. And I'm the people that I'm most frustrated with that have embraced that and propagated it are the pastors in this land who we have hundreds and hundreds of churches in Lancaster County. And I know one church that will stand behind Amos, but can we get more than one in Lancaster County? All these pastors who who preach from the Bible, who ostensibly would have read a passage, for example, like this in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 26. To impose a fine on a righteous man is not good, nor to strike the noble for their uprightness. Well, that's what we have here. We have the government imposing a fine on the righteous, if you will, punishing the righteous. What evil has Amos Miller committed? Now, we're going to get into these claims of sicknesses and illnesses, but if you willingly buy a product from someone, especially if you know, hey, these are the ingredients, these are the conditions, I choose to buy from Amos Miller because, and by the way, I've tried Amos Miller's raw, and someone told me, I think it was Marty Bent over on the Truth for the Commoner podcast. He just had me on a show, so check out that show. And he reminded me, we shouldn't even call it raw milk because for thousands of years it was just called milk. And now it's a marketing ploy of the government to label it raw, and it gives this idea, oh, this is dangerous. But for thousands of years, that's the only milk people drank. It was from the cow. And if the cow is in a healthy environment and eating the proper food, there's nothing inherently dangerous with milk from a cow. But got sidetracked there. His milk, Amos Miller's water buffalo milk is the most delicious milk that I've ever had. So if people choose willingly to buy these products, why does the state need to get involved? The state only needs to get involved if you have embraced this statist mentality that the state has to control all your decisions. They have to control, when you can drive on the road, if your vehicle is registered. They have to decide what food is safe to eat, what drinks are safe to drink. They have to tell you what vaccines you have to get. This is the nanny state mentality that has been propagated, not just by the government, but by many leaders, many Christian leaders who have taught people, hey, whatever the government says, just do it. And that's one of the problems Amos Miller is running up against, even within the Amish community, is that as a whole, the Amish community is not too keen on what Amos is doing, unfortunately. And you hear people say, well, the Amish, they've been living, this parallel economy. But unfortunately, many of the Amish, and I would say, in my estimation, at least the leadership within the Amish community does not like what Amos is doing because it's rocking the boat too much. And I really believe, just as the Amish in the 1960s apparently banded together and opposed government education for their children, they need to come together and support Amos and stand for food freedom, because what's happening here is tyranny. And this is a case of the wicked. This is a wicked persecuting the righteous. And we have pastors in the land who will say, well, you know what? Amos should just follow the regulations. So you want to roll over and let the state dictate the very food we eat, right? There will be no freedom left if people like Amos Miller are not allowed to grow food. And it's not just Amos Miller. There are other farmers that he doesn't grow all this food himself. There are other small farmers, even smaller than Amos's operation, that provide the food to him, and then he sells it within his network, his private buying club. So this is an attack not just on Amos. It's an attack not just on Amos's employees. It's an attack not just on the small farmers. It's also an attack on all of us who would want to purchase this natural food. The decision as what we eat is one of the most fundamental decisions that we make in life. And the government of Pennsylvania and the government of this nation at the federal level as well would want nothing more than to make those decisions for you. And I'll tell you what, most Americans, they've said, okay, make these decisions for me. You tell me what's safe to eat and I'll eat it. And how has that worked out for our health here in America? I don't think we're a healthier nation, than we were in the past. So a few other comments I want to make here. When I was on site there at Amos Miller's property, of course, LNP, that's the Lancaster newspaper, Lancaster Online here in Lancaster County, showed up, and Dan Neffen rolled up, and he was turned away from the property. And I wish I would have remembered then to ask Dan about his coverage of the Lancaster Pride event, where Dan Neffen said that we had a sign, some members of the church that I attend had a sign that said, burn gays. Of course, we did not have that sign. And Dan Neffen still, last I checked, that was still in his story, that we had a sign that said burn gays, which is a complete lie. We had no such sign. There was a man there who had a sign that said born gay. He was actually one of the homosexual supporters. Anyway, be that as it may, that's the type of journalism that LNP will give you. Just complete, flat out lies, and often they don't retract them. But anyway, a few other things I want to bring up. Of course, the LNP coverage often focuses on this claim that someone died from Amos's milk. So I want to read that. I want to read this quote here. This is from Dan Neffen's article in 2016. And the title of the article was Feds, Tainted Raw Milk from Lancaster County Farm Linked to One Death in Florida, One Illness in California. Now, this is, again, going back to 2016. In fact, the search warrant that was approved by a judge here for the raid that just happened on Amos Miller's farm, that search warrant cited events going back to 2016. So that's how desperate they are to go after Amos Miller. They're saying, well, we're going to go all the way back to 2016, 8 years ago, approximately, because someone got sick in 2016. Now, the claim is that someone died from Amos Miller's milk. Let me read this here. This is again from Dan Neffen in 2016. Once the illness and death were identified in January, health officials interviewed the person who became ill and the family of the person who died, according to the agency. It was reported, and actually the alleged death from the raw milk wasn't even in 2016, it was in 2014. It was reported that both people drank raw milk before they got sick, and the family of the deceased person reported purchasing raw milk from the Millers, the agency said. So this is a story that keeps coming up again and again. You'll hear people, you will see people post, oh, did you hear what happened? Someone got sick from Amos Miller's products. Well, by the way, before I address this raw milk claim here, of course, I think people are aware of the thousands and thousands of cases of foodborne illnesses that happen every year. It's an inevitable part of life that bacteria exists, microbes exist. In fact, I know people who willingly choose to consume products, whether they're raw, undercooked, meat, whatever you want, different products, and with the express intent of consuming a certain strain of bacteria in order to build immunity or things like that. I mean, there's been points in my life where I have eaten raw meat, right? And I got pretty sick, but you know what? I'm still here, and that was my decision. Other times I've had raw meat, and I was totally fine. So, you make the decisions you want with what you eat. Sometimes you will get an upset stomach. Sometimes you won't. I think more often than not, anytime I've gotten food poisoning, if you will, was not from... I can't remember ever getting sick from drinking raw milk or farm fresh eggs or anything like that. In fact, the only time I got sick from the meat that was raw was not even from an organic farmer. It was just from a traditional butcher shop, or a typical one, I guess, a modern commercial butcher shop. In any case, I'm digressing here. But my point there is you should have the freedom to eat what you want. The government does not have our best health interests in mind. But just in case you doubt whether or not that there are thousands and thousands of cases of foodborne illnesses across the nation, often from big corporations and to them, hey, they're jumping through the hoops. Okay, we had an outbreak. All right, recall this product. And you keep going. But this is a story from recently. It says ground beef is being pulled from grocery stores due to potential E. coli contamination. Another story here says Massive ground beef recall issued over E. coli concerns. That was from January 7th, 2024. It says the U.S. Department of Agriculture has announced a recall of over 58,000 pounds of ground beef for E. coli concerns. So E. coli is out there in the world, okay? Now you got to make the decision where you buy your food from, okay? E. coli is not absent from the food in the grocery store, obviously. Okay, there's thousands and thousands of cases where you have E. coli outbreaks. Okay, E. coli it's in the world. Now, how do you deal with it? You got to make your food choices. If you're buying from someone where you're getting sick or people are constantly getting sick, well, maybe you choose not to buy from that person anymore. But I tell you what, you have a lot more control and how shall I say, the ability to make an informed decision if you're buying from a local farmer as opposed to going to the grocery store and buying, from these massive corporations where you have all this input of food from who knows the conditions of the animals. I would rather be able to make my own choices and go to a local farmer and buy my food there. Okay, if I get deathly ill from it, well, first of all, it was my choice to buy the food there. And you know what? I don't ever have to go back. But apparently, Amos Miller's food is not making people sick at any sort of serious rate because his customers continue to come back again and again and again and buy food from him. Now, I want to read a part of an article that we published here at the Lancaster Patriot back in 2022. And the title of the article is Food Reporter Uncovers Listeria Claims on Miller's Organic Farm. Okay, so let's just deal briefly with this claim that Amos Miller's milk killed someone in 2014. I want to read a portion of this article because this is very interesting. So let me just pick it up here. The incident that brought Miller on the radar of the federal government dates back to 2016, when the U.S. Centers for Disease Control issued a report accusing Miller's Organic Farm of producing raw milk that was, quote, the likely source, end quote, of listeria that killed an individual in Florida in 2014. The CDC suggested that whole genome sequencing of a sample of raw milk from Miller's farm was closely related genetically to the listeria sample from the dead individual. The CDC was also quick to remind consumers in its report that, quote, people should drink and eat only pasteurized dairy products, end quote, and that raw, unpasteurized milk, quote, can carry dangerous bacteria such as listeria, salmonella, E. coli, and campylobacter, end quote. Now, of course, so can many other foods, right? Beef, spinach, all these things. The article goes on, but through his reporting on the case, Gumpert, this is referring to David Gumpert, I believe, said he was able to track down the identity of the deceased individual cited by the CDC, finding out it was a 73-year-old North Carolina woman diagnosed with advanced cancer and undergoing chemotherapy in Florida. Quote, I stand by what I wrote down, Gumpert said. The CDC and FDA have it in for raw milk, and they have for many, many years. I've written extensively about that, and I think this is just another example of their kind of hysteria about the issue and really trying to blame raw milk as the culprit for Amos Miller's issues to put him out of business. In his reporting, that's the end quote. That's the end of the quote from Gumpert. In his reporting, Gumpert said the alleged victim of the raw milk, all right, listen to this, had been living with a family member in North Palm Beach, Florida. Okay, so this is the alleged individual that died in Florida, the alleged individual. The owner of the home was a member of Miller's private membership co-op, and she told Gumpert that the victim suffered a stroke 2 or 3 weeks prior to arriving in Florida. Gumpert said the family told him the victim was suffering from neck and stomach pain before arriving at her home in Florida. The family member also said she wasn't sure she had any of Miller's raw milk in her house at the time of the incident because her children weren't drinking milk. The victim was eventually taken to a local hospital where doctors discovered a mass in her stomach and diagnosed her with lymphoma. She was put on chemotherapy and died in November of 2014. Gumpert said after the woman's death, her family was notified that she had listeria in her system. Gumpert said he attempted to find a copy of the woman's death certificate to confirm her cause of death, but he was unable to obtain a copy. I encourage you to go to LancasterPatriot.com and read that whole story. But that sheds a bit of a different light on these claims that L&P will make and others that, Amos Miller's milk killed someone. Well, we certainly don't even have, it appears, evidence for that claim of even a single individual dying from Amos Miller's food. Now, if people say, well, are you telling me that no one has ever gotten sick at all from any of Amos Miller's products? No, I don't know that. But I think people get sick from a lot of different products, right? The question is not, is it possible for a local farmer, for any of his products to make someone sick? That's not the question here, folks. The question is, does the government have the authority to dictate what we can and cannot eat? And friends, if you are a statist, you might be a statist and not know it. But if you think that the government has the authority to tell you what you can and can't eat, you are a statist, and the state is your God. And pastors out there, if you think that if you are preaching the Bible to people and you're telling them, hey, if the state tells you you can't eat it, or if the state tells you you can't sell it, you need to obey, you are not a Christian preacher. You're a statist preacher, okay? And you are telling people to follow their God, the state, okay? We need to follow the true God, the triune God of Scripture revealed in the Lord Jesus Christ. Scripture stands supreme over man-made law, and in the Word of God and the law of God, you are to punish evil doers. That's the role of the civil magistrate, and not even all evils, just specific evils laid out in Scripture. Amos Miller has not committed an evil here. He is serving his neighbor. He is serving his neighbor by offering them food that they can freely choose to buy or not buy. They can go to the grocery store if they want to buy the foods with all the preservatives and additives. They're free to do that, and the government's happy for them to do that. Gets them into their cycle of sickness and go to the medical industry complex, and the government's in bed with the drug companies and the big food companies. The government does not care about your health. They want nothing more than for you to be dependent on the state and dependent on the pharmaceutical industry until the day you die, because it's going to line the pockets of these big pharmaceutical companies, who will then end up giving kickbacks, to the government. The government does not want you to be healthy. They do not want you to be free. And this latest attack on Amos Miller is just another example of that. They do not care about your health. So you need to make the decision as an individual. Do you want to be responsible for your health, or do you want to let the state dictate what you do and do not eat? This case, it could hardly get more fundamental than this. Are we allowed to buy and sell the food that we want? And that's what this is about. So any other updates as they come, I will share them. Again, I don't think this is going away. Stay tuned for more updates here with Amos Miller. And as you're interacting with people and spreading the word, go to the LancasterPatriot.com/help Amos, and you can find information there about how to donate to the Give, Send, Go fundraiser, how you can contact the representatives for what it's worth, if they're even willing to stick their neck out at all for freedom. I think most of these representatives are cowards. They're hirelings, just like the pastors. But encourage people that do believe in freedom to stay tuned for updates, to be ready to support Amos Miller in whatever ways we can. And you see the food insecurity and all these things, and then the state government of Pennsylvania tries to shut down a man who is feeding his neighbor with high-quality food. That's tyranny. That's tyranny 101. And if we can't see that as a people, you know what? This is the America we deserve then. If we don't see this as tyranny and we don't see it as attack on our fundamental freedoms, then we deserve to be slaves to the state. So stay tuned. I believe people have been contacting Secretary Russell Redding, who is the Pennsylvania Secretary of the Department of Agriculture here in the state. I believe people have been contacting the representatives, and I know I've contacted some and pressuring them to get Secretary Redding to release this detention order of Amos Miller's food. And if he doesn't, the people need to support Amos Miller and say, eventually here, we have to feed our families, and we are not going to submit to these tyrants who tell us that we cannot eat this item, we cannot buy this food, right? That is our choice. That is a fundamental freedom that we are to have. And if we had people in our nation and in this community who believed in freedom, they would be there supporting Amos Miller. So just some words I wanted to share there on the Amos Miller situation. It's definitely a big concern. And of course, there are those who oppose it, and what they'll usually come back with is, well, oh, look how dangerous it is. People could get sick. Well, again, and these of course are the same people who will argue for, some of them at least, not all of them, some of them will argue for, quote unquote, the right to get an abortion. You got to have the freedom to murder your child, but you can't have the freedom to buy milk from an Amish farmer. Just insanity there. But folks, there are many quote-unquote conservatives and those who would claim to be Christians who would oppose what Amos Miller is doing because they, for some reason, think that the state knows what is best and the state will keep us safe. Just take a look at the history of humanity and see whether or not the state really has the best interest of people in mind. All right, well, that does it for today. If you want more information on these claims that Amos Miller's milk killed someone, go to the LancasterPatriot.com and you can look for this article, Food Reporter Uncovers Listeria Claims on Miller's Organic Farm. Also, check out our latest article on the whole saga here, State Employees Search Amos Miller Farm, Seize Property, if you're not aware of what's happening. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days. Sign up for email updates at thelancasterpatriot.com. You don't want to miss the stuff that's coming out here with Amos Miller. We also have a lot of other stories coming out of Lancaster County. Another Amish farmer is facing jail time because he sold rifles and shotguns without a federal license, which is not even required by law. But again, targeting these men, targeting them because they represent freedom, they represent the antithesis of the Nanny State. So stay tuned for more. Thank you so much for sharing all this content. We need to spread the word. We need to show our support for freedom and oppose these tyrants. So for more information, go to thelancasterpatriot.com. Until next time, God bless, and remember, Christ, not man, is king. So long.